All right, so I believe it's. Why does it
Yes,
say live?
recording started, it says.
It says live as though we're live streaming, but we're not. So it must be meaningless.
Well,
Let's
we
assume
are
that
alive anyway, so that's the
we certainly
important
are.
thing.
We certainly are. So today we are going to talk about Buddhism, something I have an interest in, and to help me with that is SOF, SOF, ESOF. I'll call him. Yes, we'll name you ESOF, which is the strength at the base of the pillar.
That'll do me. Good morning. How are you, sir?
Yes. Ship of Fools podcast, and he is a Buddhist, and he's going to help me interview a more famous Buddhist who goes by the name of Panyo. Is that right? Panyo.
Yeah, among other things. That's Panyo is short for Pannobhasa, but it's takes up too much of the little name thing at the bottom, so I just go with Panyo.
Right. And you are going to enlighten us, and I'm going to be the naive one who knows nothing about it, and sort of, as usual in these, I don't know anything about what I'm talking about, and I just sort of traipse along and luck my way into a few comments here and there, and I learn, I guess. So, let's see. So your real name is David Reynolds Panyo. Do you want to tell us about your background? Maybe that would be tell us about yourself. Would be a good way to start, I guess.
My background,
or like you were telling me how you became a Buddhist and so forth.
Oh yeah, well, as usual, when I tell about my background, I usually start with my weird father, who was considered himself to be a Buddhist, although he was more of an animist, and he was really into the occult. Did a lot of experiments with that, like witchcraft and like ESP and that sort of thing, and so I was brought up with an abnormally open mind. Like instead of watching TV or listening to the regular bedtime stories, he'd be telling you about past life regressions and astral traveling and this sort of thing. So I was a little more open-minded than usual, possibly partly due to genetics also. And then around the age of 16, I just rebelled, like a lot of 16-year-olds used to do. I don't know if they still do anymore, but when you're a kid, you just assume that adults have everything figured out, and you don't have it figured out yet because you're not grown up yet. But then around the age of 13, I started growing skeptical of that theory. And by the time I was 16, it was becoming painfully obvious that the adults were just as messed up as I was. So I just rebelled and got into a lot of trouble. Almost flunked out of school after being an honor student just months before. And so my father, one evening in a towering rage, insisted that I see a youth counselor. And it turned out the youth counselor was really a cool guy and sort of a spiritually advanced person who turned me on to Eastern philosophy. And at first I didn't really understand it, but at least there was like this deep intuitive acknowledgement that there was something there, even though I couldn't really understand it yet because it was so alien to anything I was used to. Still, I could just feel intuitively that there was some deep truth to that was more worthwhile than, the standard normie approach of just, swim upstream, spawn and die, just live your life like an intelligent animal, and then, or just like partying and getting into trouble all the time. So I became interested like around the age of 17 that I kind of made up my mind I was going to renounce the world and become some sort of renunciant. Hadn't really made up my mind yet. And then gradually over the next few years, I got sold on either Zen or Theravada. And then when I was in my late 20s, when I finally got around to really taking the plunge, I checked out a few monasteries in America, and the Theravadan one seemed closest to what the Buddha originally taught. So that's what I went with. I became a Theravada Buddhist monk for 30 years.
Wow, really? Okay, so like there's lots I could say on that. First of all, it sounds extremely Pacific Northwest. Your the elements of your background. It reminds me of a friend of mine. Because there's so many hippies and draft dodgers up there, and most of the people's parents when I was growing up were sort of like I remember my best friend's dad just shaved his head and played the flute for a year, and this kind of thing.
Oh, nice.
I'm not surprised about your upbringing sounding the way it was, but I don't even myself specifically. What is the difference, say, between Zen and the practice you studied, which the name I already forget?
Theravada.
Theravada.
Theravada is the most archaic and conservative branch or school of Buddhism that's still in existence, and it's based mainly on ancient Indian culture. So the scriptures or the texts are composed in Pali, which is an ancient Indian language, very similar to the language that the Buddha himself taught. And then Zen, it underwent, I mean, Buddhism went through a long process of evolution just in India, and then also as it moved through Central Asia and migrated into China. And Zen, as far as I know, maybe Alex would know better than me, but it was sort of a reform movement trying to get back to the original spirit of Buddhism. But still, there are some significant differences with regard to philosophy and so forth.
I wouldn't think Zen was conservative, considering how many hippies really got. I mean, that friend of mine's dad was into Zen. I remember him telling me about it. He always told me to read that book, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. That was his.
Oh yeah, there's not much actual Zen in that book, though.
Okay, I never did read it, so I
yeah, it's a good book, but yeah, there's not a whole lot of mention of actual Buddhism in it.
Right, and so before I let SOF ask you some questions, let me just, when you say conservative and ancient Indian, are we talking like sort of like Indo-Aryan ancient and like conservative? How like
conservative in that they were afraid to change very much. Okay. You know, after the first 100 or 200 years or so, it pretty much locked down and was very resistant to change. So it's conservative in the sense of conserving the ancient Indian traditional elements of Buddhism.
Right. And is that sort of something like, when you say that, I picture like Shaolin monks, you know, beating themselves and standing in place for like all day long. And is it like, am I totally talking rubbish or what?
Well, there's no martial arts in ancient Indian Buddhism, or at least in Theravada.
Okay.
It's let's see. Ancient Indian Buddhism is based heavily on like a prehistoric tradition of, like it's based on, to some degree, on the Indus Valley civilization, which apparently had like an atheistic and rather pessimistic spiritual system. Pessimistic in the sense that the world is a bad place, and you should try to escape from like worldly existence, or samsara as it's called. And you do that through purifying your karma. And right. Buddhism was sort of a modification of that, where the Buddha interpreted it more psychologically. It wasn't just some mechanical exhausting of your past karma through self-torture or whatever, that it was more of a psychological thing.
Okay. And so so you don't have to pay, like you don't, there's too many questions, so I'll just because of my naivety, pardon me. So I'll let SOF see if he has any questions for you.
Yeah, no real questions. What I would say, just quickly on the Shaolin thing, you're actually not far from the truth.
Okay.
So the first patriarch of Zen in China, his name was Bodhidharma. The legend goes that when he meditated in a cave for 10 years or whatever it was, that in his days off from facing a wall, he would mimic the actions of some of the animals outside of his cave. And interestingly, where that cave is today, the Shaolin Temple is just below the mountain where the cave is.
Right.
And that he is considered the father of Shaolin to the monks at the Shaolin Temple, which is interesting. And the way he made it up was by mimicking the movements of the animals that he supposedly saw outside of his cave. That's just an aside. Pannobhasa, I was wondering, your dad and animism. I don't think I got to ask you this last time. How does a guy in the United States end up as an animist, out of interest?
Well, he didn't identify as an animist, but that was largely his approach to reality, that the entire world is pervaded by spirit. And there's just different spirits pervading different things. And he learned his Buddhism in a very strange way, mainly through a woman who was channeling supposedly a dead Vietnamese Buddhist monk who supposedly was his guardian spirit or something. But he didn't really mention being an animist, but he was more of an animist in reality than he was a Buddhist, as far as I could tell. And he used to always say that he would have been much happier if he was like a Stone Age shaman rather than living in the modern era.
Wouldn't we all?
with maybe a little bit less cannibalism, but yes. So that's your background. So we're touching on things, and like I don't even know when you say it comes from a region which was more atheistic and more psychological, but based on, so when we're talking, it's based on Hinduism, as in it's accused of atheism because it's not observing the Hindu gods as much. Is that?
Well, at the time of the Buddha, there really was no Hinduism as we know it now. It was Vedic Brahmanism. So it was like, so the religion, the mainstream, like Indo-Aryan religion of the Buddha's time came closer to like ancient Greek religion, where it was like priests doing fire sacrifices for the sake of worldly benefits, like, sons and cattle and victory over your enemies and that sort of thing.
Yes.
There was starting to be some esoteric Upanishadic stuff that was still in its early stages in the Buddhist time.
I see.
But I think I forgot the original question.
So you said that when they were accused of being atheistic and psychological.
Oh yeah. Well, they were accused of being atheistic partly because Buddhism really does not acknowledge like a creator God. It's not a monotheistic religion. It does accept the existence of small g gods, which would be defined as any being in this universe that is higher than the human level. And we're only like fifth from the bottom. So there's of the 31 planes of existence, we're actually closer to the bottom than the top. But even the deities in Buddhism, they're not immortal. They don't really send us to heaven or to hell, any such thing. They just live their own lives. It's sort of like the Epicurean Greeks, their attitude towards the gods, where the gods exist, they just mind their own business. They don't have any interest in us, really.
Right. So there's no concept of heaven or hell type thing, because I know there is in, say, Hinduism, but
there are heavens and hells.
Okay.
But they don't last forever. So it's like in Christianity, you get one shot, and if you mess up, then you burn in hell forever and ever. Or if you're just you make the grade, then you go to heaven forever and ever. But in Buddhism, it's just reincarnation or rebirth, just life after life after life. And sometimes you go up into a heaven realm, and sometimes you go down into a hell realm, and just up and down, and just you're just pretty much trapped in samsara until eventually you become enlightened and just bail out, just escape from.
So there is the super soul, the Vedic, Neoplatonic. You can reach a certain level and ascend a reincarnation.
It's not even really a level like nirvana or like enlightenment. It's not even on the system of the 31 planes of existence. It's completely off the scale. And because of that, that's another reason why the Buddhists were considered to be atheistic, is that they didn't reify the absolute, and they didn't reify any human soul either. So there's the Buddhist doctrine of no self, where there is nothing that you can really pin down that is eternal and unchanging.
Right. Okay. Yeah, no, that's very interesting. And I was gonna ask you something else. I forget. SOF, do you have anything to add there?
Just quickly, to add some historical context, I recently read a theory, and I'm going to have this guy on my show soon. But he argues that Buddhism in northern India was essentially a rebellion against Zoroastrianism rather than Brahmanism. And his argument was that at the time in that area, King Darius of Persia had actually invaded northern India and that kind of region. And it was actually under the Persian Empire at the time. And it's a complicated argument. He goes on for a while and there's a lot to it. But there are actually a number of stones with Zoroastrian how would you say, figures and stories that they've found in the area with carvings. And his belief, and he makes a very convincing case for it, is that the Buddha at the time, he was possibly of Scythian lineage. So his ancestors may well have been a part of the armies that swept into Gandhara. And we're talking many hundreds of years before the Buddha was born. And at the time, those armies set up what were called satraps in these areas, which are probably the proto-kingdoms of where the Buddha came from, is his lineage and his family. And essentially, the argument is that he was in fact rebelling against Zoroastrianism and that monotheistic, how would you say, monotheistic religion that had come through into the area at the time. But I just thought I'd mention that as an interesting potential alternative theory that's starting to gain a little bit of ground in some circles.
A reaction to Zoroastrianism.
Yeah.
That's so many things.
Yeah, it is a surprising one. I'm having him on in a couple of weeks. His name's Christopher Beckwith. He's an academic. He specializes in Central Asian culture. He's done a number of books, including one called Greek Buddha. And I hope to question him more deeply on this. But sorry, I just mentioned that as an aside. I know I've kind of gone off track here. But
any little tidbit is interesting, anyways. So Buddhists don't call themselves monotheist or polytheist, even though they sort of have they can fit in with almost both, I guess. What do they call yourselves? No theist or
yeah, so I mean it is called an atheistic system. I mean, the Buddhists themselves generally just call it Dharma or whatever. They don't really put a label on it with regard to that. But yeah, I mean, even though there are gods, it's worshiping the gods is really not part of what Buddhism is all about. You honor them as your superiors because they're higher up than you, and you definitely don't want to piss them off. But still, they don't send you to heaven. They don't send you to hell. And anything that they do to you is going to be in accordance with your own karma anyway. So it's they're just kind of peripheral to the whole Buddhist system.
Right. And before we started, SOF suggested, and I should have maybe asked you earlier. I suggested I bring up what you do in the world, that your actual work. I believe you're in the hard sciences of some kind. Is that the case?
I think he's muted.
I'm muted?
No,
me? Sorry. No.
I was asking you. I was asking you, Panya. Sorry.
So your training, I believe, was in biology or something or other.
Oh, mine. Oh, you were asking me. I thought you were asking.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. I'm not going to ask you any questions. I don't need.
I'm boring anyway. You wouldn't want to know.
Yeah, I do have a degree in marine biology and worked as a marine biologist for several years before I became a monk. And then I just dropped out of the monkhood just a few months ago. So I'm still casting about for a suitable gainful employment, other than just teaching and writing and that sort of thing.
About Buddhism, is it? Or marine biology?
You mean the teaching and writing?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's mostly Buddhist stuff. That's what I know the best. It's what I was doing professionally for 30 years.
So when you are a Buddhist monk, like you were for 30 years, so you were living in a temple of some kind. Is that how it goes?
No, mostly actually I was just living alone in forests in Southeast Asia, like Burma mostly.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'd spend about half that time just literally living in caves.
We should talk about this. You have some amazing stories and anecdotes.
Yeah, let's hear some of that. That's yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, I really was never into conformism. And so when I became a Buddhist monk, I really did not become ordained in a Burmese tradition in order to be Burmese. I just wanted to know what the Buddha taught, and then I was going to follow that. And in ancient India, monks mostly were pretty much recluses, and they weren't living in big monasteries most of the time. And they wandered around homeless, which really wasn't an option for me in Burma, and it was just too hot, and there was a military dictatorship that was very paranoid about foreigners and so forth. So I just went out into the forest and meditated by myself most of the time.
And how did you? So you had enough money to feed yourself, or did you?
Well, I mean, monks aren't even allowed to touch money. So what you do, it was, to eat, you would just take your alms bowl and walk through the village, and people would put food into it. And then when you get enough, you leave and you sit down and you eat it, and that's it. And I mean, in the tropics, you don't have electrical bills or anything, just living in caves or whatever. So life was pretty much free.
Yeah,
which is really the way it was supposed to be. I mean, monks were supposed to, cause as little commotion. You're not supposed to be creating as little karma as possible and just living a very simplistic, minimalist sort of existence. So that's what I was doing. But after burning out on Asia, wanting to come back to America, it just the same kind of lifestyle just really does not work in the West. And so I'm experimenting with.
Why would you say that? Because you can't. someone will hound you out of your hermit shack in the woods, and
well, I mean, in a hermit shack in the woods, if a monk isn't handling money, I mean, he's got to feed himself. Monks aren't even allowed to harvest their own food. So the rules are based on ancient India. Like I said, in Theravada Buddhism, and the rules are still essentially the same as they were more than 2,000 years ago in India. And so the culture was just based on wandering religious hermits, where, you've got the wandering fellow with the robes and the bald head walking through the village with a bowl. Everyone knows you go out and put food in his bowl if you want to earn merit or whatever. And that certainly doesn't work in America. I mean, I've heard of a few monks that learned that if you stand out in front of a grocery store, sometimes people will put food in, but that's about as far as it goes. And then, of course, just living free. I mean, all the property's owned by somebody, and there's bills to pay, and you can't just live in a shack, because it has to live. There are like building codes and inspectors and everything. There has to be like an emergency exit and electricity and everything, or else it's illegal.
Too many rules.
So you just can't live in accordance with ancient Indian culture in the modern West. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, right. And also in the winter, I guess, it'd be pretty harsh. So is there what's the reason for not being able to harvest your own food? I guess it's just because you're supposed to be meditating all day and that's it.
Partly because it involved the killing of living beings, and also partly because the Buddha wanted to make sure that the monks didn't become total hermits, but had to interact with lay people at least once a day.
Right. Right. And can I ask, how were you treated as a white guy in the Burma? You said it was a bit where some people like, I'm not giving this guy anything.
There were a few, but actually, the people in Burma, I mostly lived out in the forest areas, so they were like really rustic hillbilly types mostly, and they tended to love me because it was like I vindicated their faith. They have these unrealistic ideas that all Americans are like rich and happy. They're living in some kind of paradise world, and I had renounced all of that in order to go and live in poverty with them and follow their religion at a higher level than they were able to follow it, because they weren't monks, most of them. So they felt really proud and happy to have me living amongst them. So that was nice.
Good. So you were lucky for being the odd one out.
Yeah. So I was sort of like the man who would be king, except or like Colonel Kurtz, except without the heads on poles in some places.
The man who would be king, yeah, Sean Connery. Yeah, you look a bit like him. Maybe you could get away with it. But you need a golden arrow. Cast the shadow of your hand across the land. Although that's pretty much the opposite of what you're doing, I guess. But so why did you surrender this life? What made you decide to come back to the West?
Come back to the West, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, I just burned out on living in Asia, for starters, just sweating all the time and not being able to speak English, not being able to really communicate at more than a superficial level.
So after 30 years, were you not thinking Burmese in your head and everything? I heard of people that forgot their native tongues after.
No, I continued stubbornly thinking in English, and just I'm still American. It's like, even after being a monk for more than 20 years, I still have like Led Zeppelin playing in my head, and
nice.
Just remembering, something would remind me of some old episode of Gilligan's Island or Star Trek or something. So that was one difficulty with trying to live like an ancient Indian. I was trying to imitate, the monks in the Buddhist time. But still, you just can't stop being an American. I'm just culturally conditioned to be an American. Just the way I was brought up.
And a real Pacific Northwest American of my era too. I think like your cultural references, you're making this nostalgic just talking about them.
Yeah, and also I just stopped making progress through meditating in seclusion. So I decided to come back to America to try something else. I just got as far as I could with it.
All right. Okay. Well, that's a whole other thing we can talk about, I guess. So what can I just ask finally on this topic? What did you think about the changes in the West when you came back compared to when 30 years previous?
It was kind of interesting that some things have hardly changed at all.
Okay. Like
clothing styles, hairstyles, the kind of music that people listen to really hasn't changed very much. I mean, the main
1990 is when you went, is it?
Yeah, I went to Asia in 92, 93, like around there.
Yeah.
And I mean, the main difference is internet and everything is digital now. I mean, that was like the main, most obvious difference.
Okay.
And people were a little more stressed out when I got back. You know, they're working harder to live at a lower standard of living, it seemed like.
Yeah.
And there was one benefit, really, is that after I came back and I was still a monk, at least I could walk down the street without apprehension of hostility. Because, I mean, nowadays, I mean, you can walk down the street wearing like a black evening gown and nobody would look at you twice, it seems like.
Yeah.
Right. So there was that.
No, I know what you mean, but it's 1990 was like the last decade where things did change. Like before that, every decade had its own kind of style and fashion and flavor. But it was like after the 90s, we've been stuck in like 1998 or maybe 2002, basically for the last 20 years, as far as I can see. It's like nothing changed. But
I mean, things started changing around 2015. Definitely, there's been changes since then.
Well, yeah, you mean like with things getting woke and all that? Yeah, but yeah, that is a change. But like, yeah, after a stultification, but I don't know. Even they are kind of derivative of something that was already there. But yeah. So that's interesting. Yeah. But you're not. So things are sort of the same and sort of a bit more negative, you would say, in other ways. But
in certain respects, yeah. It's really not so different. I mean, a lot of people who just they're thinking, oh, for the good old days, you know, things are really crappy now. They used to be so good, but pretty much it's pretty much always been crappy somehow or another. I mean, human beings are creating society, and human beings are pretty much the same as always. So
do you wake up in the night? Do you wake up in the night or in the morning, and you're like in a nice bed, and you're like dreaming of the cave, and it must be like that, no?
Not so much. Not so much. I mean, having a girlfriend is a radical differentiation from my old lifestyle. But
oh my goodness, and that's permitted, is it? I guess you're no longer a monk, so you can do what you want.
Yeah, I'm not a monk anymore, so I can do as I please.
Right.
Yeah.
And you didn't miss that when you were in the cave?
Yeah, I missed it. That was a challenge, definitely, because it's just built right into you. It's like a lot of people don't understand that just because you're a monk doesn't mean that you're just suddenly going to become a saint. You know, I mean, it's like we're still human. Like I was just saying, you know, we're stuck being human. So yeah, I mean, you're just gonna keep having a lot of the same attitudes and so forth. And there is such a thing as human nature. You know, it's like human animal instinct, and we're just stuck with that. I mean, it's just built right into our brains.
Oh, I know. You have to obey it, as far as I can see. I mean, not to a T, but you have to sort of have allowance for it, let's say. I just want to move on to a couple of questions that SOF gave me. Like there was one he wanted to connect to your scientific background. Did your scientific way of thinking affect how you came to Theravada?
I don't think science itself really had that much of an effect with me deciding to become a Buddhist. I had really decided to become a Buddhist before I even decided to become a marine biologist. But certainly the same sort of mentality. Like I have more of a scientific temperament than an artistic one. You know, I'm more philosophical than religious, and relatively rational and objective. So the same aspects of Buddhism that are attractive. I mean, there are similarities between Buddhism and biology. You know, both of them are the study of life. It's just one studies it from the outside and the other one studies it from the inside out. But a lot of engineers I've noticed also like Theravada. They're attracted to it just because it's so like objective and systematic.
Right. And could you summarize in any way how its principles are objective and systematic?
Well, ancient India in general they liked everything all orderly and systematized. And so original Buddhism, in my opinion, really had just minimal philosophy, just the bare minimum. But it was too much of a minimum. It was just like nature abhors a vacuum. And then when Buddhism started becoming popular, you've got more and more people that are maybe scholars and intellectuals that are joining, rather than people who are like radical mystics just going for enlightenment. And so they started cooking up all these philosophical systems, but they were intelligent people, and there is a lot of wisdom and value to it. So I hadn't really, I didn't really cling to it much. The whole philosophical systematization with these lists of the 6 of these and the 8 of those and the 37 of the other and all that. But
Right.
yeah, I mean, there is a lot of systematic philosophy in Buddhism now, even in Zen, which is iconoclastic and everything. They still got all this complicated philosophy in there.
Right. I actually remember reading the biography of the Bloody White Baron. You know him, Baron Ungern von Sternberg. Okay, he was a White Russian who he's a bit of a controversial figure.
Oh yeah, I think I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, and he became he went into China, or was it Mongolia? Sorry, I can't remember. But he sort of converted to Buddhism, and he became a big warlord. And he was famous for keeping wolves in his house. An amazing story. But I remember when I was reading it, there was a lot of talk of really, really old Buddhist temples that he was frequenting or going to, and how there was like a lot of ancient hellish demon gods involved, like blood gods and things in the very old version. Just in this book, I read this. I don't know how true. Like, what do you?
True.
Do you
So Mongolia's Tibetan Buddhism. So I've actually been there a few times.
Okay.
There's not much left now. I think the communists pretty much blew everything up, which is often the case in that area. But there are a couple of temples that still exist, some older ones. And yeah, it's Tibetan Buddhism, effectively, Vajrayana. And obviously they have a lot of, demigods, things like that, wrathful deities, tantric deities that are all part of their system that they use. I think that's probably what he's referring to. I actually haven't finished that book yet. I do have it on my shelf here, but I would imagine that's what he's referring to.
Oh yeah, it was just an offhand thing I remember because it doesn't sound like it's anything to do with Theravada or Zen even.
No,
is it?
No, definitely not Zen. Definitely, yeah. Mongolia is very much Tibetan Buddhist. And yeah, it's kind of
so they're a bit more sort of pantheist, is it?
Tibetan Buddhism integrated Bon, or I think that's how you say it, Bon, which is like a shamanistic animist religion, which is interesting. Buddhism is actually combined in a couple of ways. In Japan, it's similar. You have Shinto.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, Bhante, in Burma, if there's some animist elements to how Buddhism is integrated in Burma. But certainly in Mongolia and Tibet, that's definitely the case. And you can absolutely see those influences, which is why it's so distinct.
Yeah, the Burmese themselves came down from the foothills of the Himalayas during the Middle Ages, and they brought with them, it's called the Nat cult. It was a kind of polytheism, mostly worshiping powerful spirits of people who died of violent deaths. And they've incorporated that a little bit into Buddhism, but mostly it's just sort of peripheral to Buddhism now. But still, if you go through Burma or even Thailand, you can see the little tree shrines and people making offerings to the beings that live in like the local. Assam is one word that they use in Burma. It's just like the local spirit, this sort of the guardian spirit of the area, that kind of a thing. That goes back to animistic times.
Yeah, I love that. I love those ideas like that, like little house gods and things. I try to observe that a bit myself, like around here, but.
Do you have Irish house gods or how?
Well, I have my own house god. Let's say I don't.
Oh,
yeah, I don't.
Leprechauns.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, the fairy folk, the doppelganger. Do you ever read about doppelgangers in Irish history? It's actually it's very interesting and strange, and like that it was a part of a living folklore that they believed for a long, long time that people could just be swapped and switched out. So I would guess over the centuries, like anybody who just started acting kind of oddly, or for any reason, they might get dementia or this or that, would be like, oh, that's not him. Like, we better burn him.
Like changeling or something.
The changeling, yeah, the story of the changeling. Like, it wasn't just babies. Like, an adult could be switched if, especially if you disrespected a fairy fort, which would be like an old ruin from, or like a ring of stones from the Tuatha De Danann, they used to call them, which is basically the fairies, which were the people that constructed all the, like Stonehenge and Newgrange, that nobody knows what happened, that they're all dead. They're gone. But anyways, that's total digression from everything here. SOF, did you want to say? So another one of your questions, which we should get into because I don't know, and a lot of people don't know, is the history of the Buddha himself and like who was he? Does one of you want to summarize that?
Gautama Buddha. Well, according to Theravadan tradition, which is, as I say, the most conservative tradition still in existence, he was born in Kapila Watu, which is now in Nepal. So he was born in Nepal, and he was a noble of the Sakya clan, and so I mean, according to legend, he was like a royal prince and everything. But the historians say that Kapila Watu was like a city-state that was ruled by like an aristocracy. So he was probably one of the aristocracy, and he just had some sort of awakening. According to the legend, he was when he was a baby, like a fortune teller read the marks on his body and started crying. And then his parents are alarmed. They ask him why he's crying. He says, "No worries. He's destined to become either the king of the world or a fully enlightened Buddha. And I'm crying because I'm not going to live long enough to see it happen." And so his father, being according to the legend, a king, he wanted his son to become king of the world. So he gave him a very sheltered life. He lived in palaces with all female staffs, and just lived in luxury. But then finally he wanted to see the actual people that he was going to rule over someday. And so he sees the four signs, which are, let's see, a sick person, a dead person. What was the third one? Sick person, dead person. Oh man. Anyway, the fourth one was a renunciant. And so the first three signs he sees are like very troubling because he'd been completely sheltered from that sort of thing. And so even though he was married and he had just had his first son, he was so troubled by all the suffering in the world that he was clueless about up until he finally sees it, that he just renounces the world and goes out into the forest and follows the ancient Indian traditions of, the usual ways of becoming enlightened, which were two. One was meditation, the other one was self-torture. So he first he tries the meditation and masters all of the trance states, but he realizes that trance states aren't going to get you enlightened. So then he goes over to the self-torture stuff and just tortures himself till he's almost dead, and he realized that doesn't work either. And then finally, he just sits under a tree in Bodh Gaya, sits under it's a species of fig tree, Ficus religiosa, the Bodhi tree. And he just sits there, and he's just determined he's just going to keep sitting there in meditation until something happens. And right around dawn, he had his illumination and became enlightened. And then he spent the rest of his life just wandering around as the traditional homeless monk, just wandering from place to place, and started up a new religious system.
And was he very popular in his life with this?
There were several teachers who were more popular than he was.
Oh, okay.
But he apparently struck traction, though, and his system really took off.
So why do they worship him with these giant statues and things if they don't think of him as a? Do they think of him as a deity in some way? Or
a lot of not very well educated Buddhist people in Asia think that he is essentially God. And in Mahayana Buddhism, they have sort of worked up sort of a cosmic Buddha who is essentially a kind of God. Okay. But I mean, the statues didn't even exist for hundreds of years. Excuse me. It was originally, they were in art, Buddhist art, they were emphasizing the fact that the Buddha had just completely gone off the scale. He wasn't in samsara anymore. So they would just have like a footprint or an empty seat to symbolize, where the Buddha used to be. And then according to the story, the first Buddha statues were made by Greeks. It was like Alexander the Great conquered northwestern India, and then the Greek colonists there, most of them possibly converted to Buddhism, and they liked their statues, and so they're the ones that started making Buddha statues, and then it just caught on.
Yeah, I saw that too. There was a Greek involved. There was some Greeks were brought over when they were doing the famous Chinese terracotta the army that's buried with the king or whatever. You know,
Oh.
they discovered some Greeks were brought in like to help with that. I guess they were just famous statue people. Or,
Yeah, they were good at statues.
well, they certainly were. Yeah, from Phidias and so forth. From then on. Yeah. So when you were being a monk, did you also torture yourself and all that, or did you just go straight for the meditation the whole time?
Well, in Buddhism, they teach the middle path, which is the middle path between self-indulgence and self-torture.
Okay.
So self-torture is rejected in the very first sermon, which is the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, which is considered to be the first sermon the Buddha delivered after his enlightenment. He's saying that self-indulgence doesn't work and self-torture doesn't work, so you should just follow the middle path. But the middle path in ancient India still was pretty radical, because it was just wandering around homeless with no money and no family and no friends, and you're begging silently for food in the street, and you're sleeping on the ground under trees and that sort of thing, right, which would be beyond acceptable levels of self-torture to most modern Buddhists.
Right.
Yeah, so like when it became like a mainstream religion, they developed a new middle path, which was like the middle path between self-indulgence and the original middle path. And then when Buddhism came to the West, it was like they made a newer middle path, which is the middle path between self-indulgence and the traditional Asian middle path. And even though most Buddhists are hugging right up to the self-indulgence side, still they tend to veer off the path towards more self-indulgence.
So there's no, Buddhists don't generally have, say Christians and other Semitic religions are really kept in place by the threat of hell and the promise of heaven kind of thing.
Yeah.
So with Buddhism, it's none of that is, I mean, also to a certain degree with paganism sounds like a lot of paganism, or even Platonism, is like in between these ideas maybe, or something. I don't know. Like for a devout Buddhist, it's all about a journey of the self, without any threats necessary. Or is there threats?
Well, I mean, if you do bad, then you go downwards. If you do more bad than good, you go downwards. If you do more good than bad, you go upwards. And so, I mean, there's always the danger of hell or being reborn as like a ghost or an animal or something until you finally get off the wheel. But you can't really say it's a journey of the self, because Buddhism teaches that ultimately there is no self. So there's that too.
And so how does that work? I can understand that in some ways, because I've kind of felt like that way, not from studying Buddhism, but yeah. Can you explain that a little bit? And then I should get SOF to.
Yeah, well, it's notoriously hard to understand, which is one reason why there's so many different explanations of it. But it's like,
tell me now.
What we are is sort of like a flame. It's different from one moment to the next, and the flame will continue to exist, even though it's not the same flame from one moment to the next, so long as like the fuel and the oxygen and everything are there. So long as the causes for the flame are there, then the flame will be there, even though it's not really the same flame. It's just like a convenient term, just a convenient label you put onto something, even though it's different from one moment to the next.
Right.
So that's pretty much the way Buddhism sees the self, or at least in Theravada, they see it that way, where it's just like a term of convenience for something that really doesn't have any abiding essence that persists through time.
Right. Interesting. Okay. SOF, do you have anything to add to that? Since you haven't.
Difficult to build on that, really. I would say that an interesting frame I heard recently was the right side of the brain being symbol using, and the left-hand side, other way around, left-hand side being symbol using to do with language and conceptualization, and the right-hand side, I guess what you'd refer to as the unconscious mind. It's connected to everything. It's the part of our brain that works without our imposing on it. It just works. Whereas the left-hand side of the brain, the way that the scientists refer to it, was as a little tyrant, that it kind of takes responsibility for everything that happens. It's saying that through its use of language and concept that, oh, look what I did. I did this, I did that, I made this happen. Well, I moved my arm, I ate food, I went to the toilet, whatever it is. And that basically that side of things is a bit like a mirage. So it's not like it isn't there, but it isn't there substantially. And I really like that frame. To me, and it may not be the exact thing, and please come in, Pannobhasa, if you think it's nonsense, but I feel like a lot of these philosophies and ideas and ways of being, they drill down in such a way that in a sense they're constantly beating up the left-hand side of the brain. So with Zen, you see this. You see it with koans. You see it with things that are deliberately designed to confuse you and make that side of things break down. And I think you see that in other religions as well. And I know you've been talking about that, Pannobhasa, in the trickster and the paranormal, these sort of notions that if you break down word use and concepts, that it gives you access to something liminal. And I just really like this frame. I liked the idea that the self is almost measurably now a mirage. They've kind of slowly coming around to accepting this from observations they make about neurophysiology and other things like that. And for me anyway, I see the doctrine of the no self in the same way, even though that is a materialist explanation and it's not the whole thing, and it can never be, because that in itself is also a left brain explanation. It may give the people listening some insight into the self and its ephemeral nature, I guess you could say.
Okay, good. That's it is.
Yeah, another way of looking at it is like if people in the West are more familiar with Western philosophy, there's like the philosophy of Immanuel Kant, who said there are two different levels of reality. You know, you've got the thing as it seems, and you've got the thing in itself. And the thing in itself, which is ultimate reality, things as they really are just completely beyond our reach, according to Kant. So we're pretty much stuck in the thing as it seems, you know, which is like the Matrix or Plato's cave or whatever.
Yeah, Plato would have been very similar. Yeah.
Yeah. So Buddhism has a very similar approach to reality, where you just cannot understand reality by thinking about it, because thinking is all just thing as it seems. And if you want the thing as itself, you've got to completely leave symbolic thought behind and just penetrate directly through.
You're just like categorizing things and making things up in a way.
Yeah.
Things almost actually indefinable things that you're
categorizing to understand. In Buddhism, there's the famous simile of the raft, where it's like a person is trying to cross a flooded river, and there's no bridge and there's no ferry boat or anything. So he just gets a bunch of sticks and like leaves and dried grass and vines and everything, and just lashes together this float. And then he holds onto that and kicks his legs and gets across to the other side. And then he just throws it away, because, you know, he's not going to just keep carrying it around with him, because he doesn't need it anymore. And that's really what like Buddhist philosophy is like. It's just this convenient contraption made of junk that just helps us to get to the other side, and then we just let go of it. So that's all the Buddhist philosophy and everything. It's, you know, even from the point of view of Buddhism, it's just like sort of convenient junk that is very useful, but once you've gotten what you need out of it, you let it go.
Right. And can I ask, why do you think that Buddhism has taken off so well in the West? And what do you think of the variants of Western Buddhism that you see Westerners practicing?
I think one reason why Buddhism was so successful in the West is partly it's very different from Christianity, and the people that were coming to Buddhism were abandoning Christianity mostly. So there's no God to worship. There's no story really that you have to have faith in. You can be very skeptical and like rationalistic and still consider yourself a good Buddhist. And so I assume that's the main thing, is it really is pretty harmonious with the Western way of thinking, you know, just sort of the objective, no nonsense, no fairy tale kind of, I mean, there's plenty of fairy tales, but they're not really central to the point. You can just reject those or ignore them. And I mean, the central teaching of Buddhism remains the same. You don't have to believe that, you know, the Buddha was born of a virgin or anything like this. So that's one thing. But with regard to what we've got now, it's a very degenerate form of Buddhism, because that same approach of not wanting to believe anything on faith or any such thing, it really causes a lot of Buddhists, possibly most of them in the West, just to reject any parts of it they don't like. And it has become very, very lukewarm and very watered down.
Yeah, it seems like everything in the West actually becomes that way.
Yeah.
For
Pretty
me
much.
personally, like I can't practice with people anymore because it's so far left. It's so completely missing the point. There were meetings here, for example, and I'm not going to go into where or who or anything. No one's going to know anyway, unless you're in Sydney. But there were people here pushing all sorts of political agendas, which to me just seems absolutely outrageous that you would be a Buddhist and push a political agenda in practice, at least practice. And at the Sangha, you'd have far left things like BLM, even in Sydney. I mean, we don't even really have black people here. I don't know what the big deal is. I mean, we've never really had an African American slave trade or anything like that. But they seem to these days embrace a lot of these far left political positions, and some of them even act like victims, which we were just talking about. The notion of the no self, if you don't substantially exist, seems absolutely ridiculous to me. But I could be wrong. But I know
you mean they take a victimhood as Buddhists?
Yeah, a lot of them are like I've seen people, act like embrace those victim ideologies. So like feminism and have awareness days about patriarchy and
in
how
America
I'm
they're
repressed
actually teaching mindfulness of white privilege now.
Right. I've never seen that. That's an extreme one. But yeah, there you go. Okay. And you've had a bit of experience with this, haven't you, Pannobhasa, recently? I think you were published in a journal.
Oh, yeah.
Of some kind.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like Western Buddhism comes closer to Western Unitarianism than it does to Asian traditional Buddhism now. With the rainbow flags out front and more talk about, white privilege and global warming than about what the Buddha actually taught, that sort of thing.
So why would the Western Buddhists gravitate to, is it that they only get into Buddhism out of some kind of hippie way to identify with an ethnic religion or something? Is that?
I think part of it is that Buddhism in the West is going to be mainly a leftist phenomenon anyway, since traditional conservatives in the West who have religious leanings are more likely just to go along with the traditional conservative religion of Christianity.
Right. Okay.
So, and then when leftism started going really progressive in social justice back around 2015 or so, then a lot of the Western Buddhists just went along with it.
Just like everybody else.
Pretty much. Yeah.
My own thought is, as well as these people tend to be atheistic. So they're immediately appealed to, rightly or wrongly, Buddhism, seeing it as atheistic, perhaps, and they bring a lot of those inheritances to it.
In the West, they're so materialistic that they will reject some of the most fundamental teachings of Buddhism, even nirvana or enlightenment. They want everything to be completely materialistic, so that Buddhism really becomes a little more than just a kind of self-help system that's sort of like a natural substitute for like tranquilizers or something.
Yeah, Valium.
or Xanax or whatever it is nowadays.
Another SSRI for their collection. Yeah.
This term mindfulness is very popular. I see all the housewives and people talking about it. So that's a kind of, I'm not even sure what it is. Some kind of watered down version of meditation, I assume. Is it? You mentioned it there.
You could call it a kind of meditation. It's mainly just being in the present moment and not trying to interpret what you're experiencing. I think like Krishnamurti called it choiceless awareness, right, where you're just in the present moment and you're not processing what you're experiencing. You're just working with, or just accepting like the raw data that you're being fed through your sense organs.
So when you guys are, say, with other Buddhists and this sort of carry on is going on, do you say anything or do anything, or is it in the practice of Buddhism anything that's like, that's just another thing to ignore and you just kind of get on with it? Is that what you do?
Personally, I tend to avoid the progressive left-wing Buddhist groups, and okay. I mean, I've been avoiding them for years. So mainly we're just interacting with people of similar views to ourselves with regard to traditionalism, and just accepting what, you start off accepting what the original texts say, and then you don't try to change that. You can say, well, we're not in a position to follow this or that anymore. But I'm not going to say, well, the Buddha didn't teach that because it's racist or sexist or whatever.
Right. And does the Buddha have teachings? He talks about, let's say, typical religious things you should do in terms of, like, say, marriage, and, you know, is there like laws like that, like you find in the other religions, if you're not a monk?
For lay people, it's mainly just 5 precepts, and generosity are like the main teachings for people that aren't monks. So the 5 precepts are no killing animals, no stealing, which would also include like cheating on your income tax, that sort of thing. No sensual misconduct, which mainly means no adultery and no promiscuous sex.
Okay.
No wrong speech, which mainly means no lying. Also, it can include like bad-mouthing people behind their back and that sort of thing. And then finally, there's no wine, ale, or intoxicants which cause heedlessness or cloudedness of mind. That plus just being generous are like the main teachings for non-monk lay people.
I see. Okay.
I would add just quickly, when you look at the original texts, some of the older ones, and I actually had a guy on my show, John Powers, who's an academic, who wrote a book called A Bull of a Man about the Buddha. There are quite a lot of things that your average progressive leftist would really find difficult to handle. Some of the descriptions of women, some of the descriptions of the way that he is. He's an ultra masculine dude in these texts. And I'm sure Pannobhasa would agree, coming from that Indo-Aryan culture and being allegedly of the warrior caste, the Kshatriya, there's no real softness. There's no, the image you have today is one of him being soft and turn the other cheek and all this kind of stuff. But this was a virile, courageous picture that these people were painting of this guy. I remember just back on when he left the temple, his father's kingdom, the castle. I do recall a story where the description in English anyway was something like, when he woke up, he was kind of hungover or drowsy or something, and he looked at the women surrounding him on his, pleasure bed, whatever they had back then. And he referred to them as bags of filth, and that he felt utterly disgusted by their presence. And that was part of his thing about like, oh, Jesus Christ, this is awful. I'm out of here. And you have all these descriptions like of all his powers and feats that he proved to everyone that look at me on the border, look at what I can do. They're like ultra masculine descriptions. Like he's the best at archery. He can do all these magic tricks. It's like these fantastical masculine descriptions. And I really recommend you read that book. It's fascinating. And I'm not saying that's the essential message, but you can see that from the original way that people perceive this to these days, how people are looking at it is just 180 degrees different. It's the polar opposite, and particularly
I like your I love your description of his thoughts there. Jesus Christ, I'm out of here.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah.
Theravada Buddhism could be
Mara. I'm out of it.
It could be like considered possibly the most masculine spiritual system in existence, partly because it was devised by men for men. And the men who devised Buddhism avoided women like the plague. They're just following this ascetic system just with other men out in the forest. And, they're not even supposed to talk to women or look at them much other than what is absolutely necessary just when they're collecting their food in the village. And they were ascetics. They had to be tough as wood. Yeah. And now it's pretty much been taken over by like Jewish lesbians and so forth in the West.
Yeah, I think almost all the religions were really they had ingrained in them to be effective and to help the people some kind of resistance to what we would call now feminism and say the over prevalence of, dare I say it, female opinion. Just you got to watch out for it. It's you can take a heartwarming attitude towards it, but almost all the religions, even the Christianity originally would have a warning about it like that. And this we can see the results of not following that warning, I think. But,
some aspects.
We can talk about this too much, but it's a bit.
Some aspects of Buddhism really are popular with the more feminine mind, just the non-violence and compassion, that sort of
Yeah,
thing.
vegetarianism is.
Well, even the Buddha ate meat. It was, original Buddhism was not vegetarian. Yeah,
Oh, really?
yeah, you weren't allowed to kill animals. Monks
So
weren't allowed to accept meat that was killed for their sake, but still, they were just eating the leftovers that people were handing them when they walked through the village, so they couldn't be
So
fussy.
the five precepts you mentioned, those were by him. He wrote those.
It was some version of the 5 precepts was common to pretty much all lay people in the Buddhist time in India. So, like the Hindus had their own version, the Jains had their own version. So
Right.
he just sort of modified that as like a consolation to the lay people that were his supporters. Just gave them a little bit.
Can I ask? Are you two vegetarians?
I am not.
I'm not. No, absolutely not.
Neither one of you. Really? Okay.
No. If you go to Tibet,
you don't
Mongolia,
worry when you don't worry when you're eating meat that's affecting you karmically, or I mean, I'm not either.
Karma is volition. It's like it's a mental state. So I mean, it's nothing mechanical. So I mean, if you're eating with a clear mind, then you're not making bad karma by doing it. And you probably get more bad karma just from having the greed for the good food, I suppose, than actually eating meat.
Right. Okay.
In Tibet and Mongolia, you can't grow vegetables, so they're carnivorous.
Oh yeah.
So either they're all not turning into saints, or there's something not completely right about the vegetarian angle. But yeah, when I first went to Lhasa, I remember turning up, and one of the first things I saw was a monk, and he may not have been a strict one, munging into a yak burger at a cafe. So I don't think there's necessarily a strong strain of vegetarianism there, particularly.
Really? I didn't know that. I thought most of them were. Yeah. I know in Mongolia they drink like mare's milk, and I think they even make liquor out of fermented horse milk.
Yeah, it's called airag.
Is it?
Yeah,
Okay.
mare's milk fermented. Yeah. Awful stuff. It's
I'm sure.
terrible. Yeah.
I'm sure it sucks. Yeah, that's funny. Let's see here. A couple more questions, and we're like getting into I think we're over an hour or so. But I mean, there's a lot of good, interesting facts here. That's for sure. For someone like me who knows like nothing, you guys are making me wise.
Oh, good.
There's a few things. Okay, there was a question I missed there about that SOF had written out for me, which was, I'm not sure if we covered it or not. The difference between, God, where's it gone? Hold on. The difference between Theravada and another discipline.
Mahayana. I think we're circling back. But,
yeah, that's it. Yeah, circling back.
So we kind of
did we talk about that?
Largely.
Oh, we did.
Really.
Oh, we didn't. Okay. What's the difference? Oh, a little bit. Okay. Which one's Mahayana? Is that to do with Zen or?
Well, you started off with what was called Hinayana, or at least the Mahayanists call it Hinayana, which was archaic Buddhism, still pretty similar to what the Buddha originally taught. And then there were different movements within early Mahayana, like 2 main ones, I think. One was devotional, where they were turning the Buddha into sort of a god. And that would include like what is called Pure Land Buddhism now, where you're just praying to the Buddha to get reborn into a better world where it's easier to practice Buddhism, something like that. But also there was like a reform movement, where we were talking earlier about how original Buddhism was very minimalistic, very simplistic in its philosophy. And then you have these philosophers cooking up these just elaborate scholastic philosophies like Abhidhamma that there were some later Buddhists who wanted to get away from that. They wanted to get back to the simplicity and like just the enigmas and the paradox of just breaking down the thinking mind, and just the whole idea that you can't understand reality by thinking about it. So that got turned into a kind of movement that was included Buddhists from various different sects. And then it just took its own evolutionary course, and then migrated into like Central Asia and China and Japan and Korea and other places, where it just kept evolving and evolving. And so you can have some forms of Buddhism now that have almost nothing to do with what the Buddha originally taught. And that would be more Mahayana than Theravada. Theravada, as I say, was very conservative and didn't want to change much after the first 100 or 200 years.
And do these different factions ever do they sort of hate each other, or do they get along? Is there a larger tent where they all sort of say we're all Buddhist and get along, kind of thing?
I think they all acknowledge that they are followers of the Buddha, but like the Mahayanas had a low opinion of the Theravadins and called them Hinayana, which means like the deficient vehicle. And yeah, I mean, there was a lot of snarking back and forth, but I mean, they were nonviolent about it.
Right. Okay. And so you were saying before about the issue of language being problematic, and SOF had included a question as how does Zen solve the issue of language? Is that something?
How did Zen solve the issue?
Is that what I wrote? It sounds.
Yeah, you said, how does
okay.
Zen solve?
I must have been. Yeah, I don't know what was going on there.
Okay.
I don't even know what I was getting at. I think we've already gone through language, though. I think in symbol use, probably.
Okay. Okay, I'll leave that alone. Yeah. I didn't want to miss any of your questions, even though it's jumping back and forth.
That's quite all right. Yeah.
So Zen. So you're not a practitioner of Zen,
Me?
Zen. It's neither one of you are you?
So I'm not anymore. So in the past. But nowadays I just do it by myself. So I guess you could say that I am, but not formally, if that makes sense. I don't like.
Yeah, I have some
formally practice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I was considering becoming a Zen monk until I actually went to a Zen monastery and converted to Theravada.
So because you didn't like what you saw, or?
Yeah, it was like monks and nuns just putting on lay clothing and driving to the store and running the shop that sells candles and statues and incense and stuff, and like lots and lots of bowing and ceremonies and pure land stuff mixed in. So it just seemed so far away from what the Buddha originally taught that I went
pure land stuff. Is that what you said? Pure land?
Yeah. It's a kind of Buddhism that developed in Mahayana, where you're praying to some Buddha or other to get reborn into a better life, instead of just going for enlightenment in this life.
So it's interesting. Pannobhasa, I actually met someone who reads your stuff and listens to you as well, who's actually a Pure Land Buddhist here in Sydney. And I actually met up with him to go through it. I had no idea about it before, but apparently they're totally against like meditation, and they kind of look down on actual practices that I'd always considered fundamental to Buddhism. So it was kind of shocking. I don't know much about it still, but anyway, he's a big fan of yours.
Hare
So I
Krishnas.
thought I'd mention that.
What's that? Hare Krishnas? What?
It's kind of like the Hare Krishnas, where they're also opposed to meditation, where they just think your only hope of salvation is just reciting the names of God over and over again.
Really? Is that what they? I didn't know that. I remember in Vancouver, I used to come across the odd Hare Krishna and try to talk to him because they'd be on the street, trying to give you the Bhagavad Gita. And I would say, how did you, how did you end up like this? Could be like a normal Western guy or whatever. And I remember a lot of them were like, got into martial arts. Some of them dropped acid. And through these avenues, they got into that practice. But like, so you sound like a little bit disdainful of them. Is that true?
Well, I don't agree with their philosophy. I mean, I'd take it that far. Although, what's the
story? I don't even understand what they are compared to Hindus and Buddhists and everything else. What are they?
They're a branch of Hinduism. They're a kind of Vaishnavite Hinduism that worship Krishna, who is an avatar of Vishnu. And their whole idea is you just completely devote yourself to Krishna and just recite his name and the names of Vishnu over and over again as a kind of devotional practice. And that's
and you shave your head and you stand around dancing.
Yeah, essentially. Right. And you eat vegetarian food.
Right. Because they were quite popular at one point in the West. They'd be on the street. I don't see them anymore, but
yeah, it was another sort of hippie counterculture thing.
Right. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah.
But it's similar in Buddhism, like what you said about the martial arts and the dropping acid is kind of an avenue to moving on to something else, like more like Eastern philosophy. Because like my generation, probably most Western monks of my generation started off with like psychedelic drugs, and they would have like some sort of expanded consciousness, where you have no doubt that it's just at least as real as ordinary waking consciousness. And then you want some kind of systematic way of cultivating that without having to rely on chemicals. So a lot of people became monks for similar reasons.
Did that happen with you or no?
Something like that, yeah.
It
Yeah,
was like that.
if I hadn't taken psychedelic drugs, there's a good chance I wouldn't have become a monk.
All right. So once again, your Pacific Northwest background plays into it, because I had the same thing. Although I didn't become a monk, but I certainly experimented with psychedelics, and I still to this day kind of, I don't know. I try not to say that I recommend them, but I can only say that I'm glad that I did them. Although I had a few bad episodes as well, but definitely very fascinating. Like I remember I took one. I had one once where I had a living or a hallucination that was so real. And it was that there was people in the shadows that weren't really there, but I could see them, and this kind of thing. And I can see how that would lead you to these religious or seeking religious understanding beyond the obvious Christian ones, because you get a feeling for the world that there's something behind it that's, you can't, your senses are limited to, and you get a glimpse of now and then, let's say. So I can understand it. Yeah.
I think it's the ultimate way of breaking down the left brain. That's for sure.
Is it? Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think, and there's actually research on that. It really inhibits certain parts of the brain. I think with blood flow or something or other. But my experiences of them have been largely positive, and I'm the same as you guys. I probably wouldn't have considered these kinds of things necessarily in the same way if I hadn't had it. There's a big I don't know if you've noticed, but amongst the right wing, there's very much a teetotaler attitude towards these kinds of things that
it annoys
has arisen. It annoys me too. It's very puritanical. It's I can see it in a way because they perhaps see it as a rejection of the left and what they consider to be leftist things. But nevertheless, for some people, sometimes, not all the time, I think these can be useful experiences to have. Certainly it's not for everyone.
For taking them.
Yeah, I think it is entirely useful. Even if you have a really bad one, it's like a psychologically traumatic, but as Nietzsche says, anything that doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I always felt that was part of it as well. And this actually ties back to what you said at the beginning about Zoroastrianism and taking the Soma, really, if there is a link there, if that's something we all had in common, you guys have in common, and many of those other guys did as well.
It could well be. I heard a story that during, and this is, I forget where it was written, sorry, but I heard a story that where when there wasn't enough food, and this is amongst the Buddha's Sangha, that he would allow the monks to eat blue lotus flower in the lake if they were super hungry, but they couldn't eat it all the time. And I forget where I read this, but I found that fascinating, of course, because that flower allegedly has psychoactive properties. And this guy tied it back to Soma and in his theory. But again, who knows? Just an interesting thing to consider. But I have no doubt that a lot of people through history did have these experiences. A lot of
there's no account of the Buddha having one, anyways.
No, I'm not alleging that, but I just thought it was an interesting theory and outlook.
It is kind of interesting that cannabis is allowable to monks for medicinal purposes. It is mentioned even in the oldest texts.
Is it really?
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Okay, that's something. Yeah.
Not supposed to do it for recreational purposes, but medicinal ones are okay. Medicinal cannabis is allowable.
Right. Okay. That's interesting. Yeah, I didn't know
that is interesting because not much else is allowable. So that's
true.
The one exception. That's quite bizarre. Yeah. Wow.
Okay. Well, I think I have two more questions for you, and then I'll let you go. So, one is, since the beginning, I've been dying to ask you, when you were living in the cave, how did you feel health-wise and so forth? And did you ever get sick? That stuff. Like that?
Yeah, well, I had malaria like 7 or 8 times, and got a few weird tropical diseases, giardiasis and that sort of thing. But
what does that do?
It just gives you raging gas and squirts and stuff.
Most of those tropical ones like to do stuff like that.
Yeah. And just the food can do that. You just eat some
water.
shrimp curry that went off. They got no refrigerators or anything. It's tropics and hot and everything. Food goes bad fast. So, but I have a pretty sound constitution. I'm healthy by nature. Praise the gods. And there's just this a common belief in Buddhism that if you support Buddhism, Buddhism supports you. If you're upholding the Dhamma, Dhamma upholds you. And so just meditating a lot, you get a really refined feeling of how your body is working. Any kind of imbalance, you can catch it really quickly. And a lot of illnesses, it's like you don't even know that you're sick until you're already pretty darn sick. Whereas if you're meditating a lot, you're really sensitive to what's going on in your body and in your mind. It gives you a greater resistance to things really getting out of kilter.
Right. And would you do regular exercise? Is that allowed? Would you go like jogging or?
Well, I'd walk a lot, and the standard fetch would carry water kind of a stuff, and that was generally good enough.
Right. Okay. And so you just slept on the floor in the cave?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, just if I had a bed at all, it would just be a wooden pallet with like a straw mat over it. But sometimes I would just sleep on the concrete floor just because that was the coolest place where you could sleep.
Right.
Because it was hot. It was really hot there.
Right. 30 years of that.
Well, it was more than 20. It was like 24 years in Burma, and the rest was mostly in America, a little bit of time spent in Bali also.
All right. Okay. So you would go back in between.
I was commuting back and forth for several years.
And what did your parents think of this? Did they accept your choice? Were they?
Oh, my mother didn't have a spiritual bone in her body. And so she just didn't get it at all. And
so she thought you were going crazy.
Obviously, she would have much preferred having grandkids,
Yeah.
But my father, he taught me to be a free thinker. I inherited a lot of my weirdness from him. So he was proud of me, but he thought I was an extremist. He thought that really just completely going for the cave dwelling monk thing was going a bit overboard.
Yeah, I can see how they would think that.
Yeah.
It's a great story, and it's good that you did. I think it's great, but I can see how they would think that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be hard for them. Yeah. But okay. I think that answers that one. So the last question is, which was on SOF's list. Unless, do you have a question, SOF, before I ask the final question?
No, I'm good. I'm
You're
very
good?
familiar with Pannobhasa. We've had a couple of conversations. So
Okay, so I hope this is a good question because it's the last of your questions. But it is, can Buddhism or Buddhist attitudes save the West?
Well, it's theoretically possible. I'm not exactly sure how it would happen, but it is possible. I think like Albert Einstein had the famous statement that if there was any religion that could really be suitable for the modern West, it would be Buddhism. I'm not exactly sure why he said that, but the way things are going now, though, it's like almost all religious systems are just getting taken over by progressivism and turned into just some sort of religion-flavored progressivism. Like
They're the popular. They are the popular cult.
Yeah, so there would have to be some sort of charismatic Buddhist teacher who would be able to really strike traction with enough people to really get the ball rolling, and it would have to be some kind of like a counterculture against the now predominant culture that used to be the counterculture, where it'd be like a return to some sort of self-discipline and honoring masculinity in men, and like morality, not just compassion, but like actual ethical standards and morality. And so it is possible, but I'm not holding my breath.
Yeah, it's something that, you're right about morality, ethical virtue. And what we need is, like, to obey an ethical virtue this is where you have to make the art of the hard decision, where you realize you take the least of two bad decisions. What's the term when you?
Lesser of two evils.
Lesser of two evils in decision making. Right now, we just retreat from any decision making that sounds scary. We just run away. But really, in a real proper religious morality, you decide and you make the hard choice, because the lesser one is going to hurt some feelings or damage something or hurt somebody, but you make the choice and you do it because it's the lesser of it's the lesser of the two evils. That's the rationality of proper virtue, I would say. Anyways, that's the concept we've lost, that any religion that's going to do any good would have to bring back.
Yeah, so I think things might have to get worse, and then it could inspire like a kind of neo-Stoic movement that would have a lot of Buddhist elements in it, where people are just learning how to face harsh realities without freaking out or complaining or blaming Whitey or whatever. That's one of the main things in Buddhism. It's like all suffering is ultimately self-inflicted. That's like a central teaching of Buddhism that even most Buddhists ignore, because whether you're happy or not depends on your own attitude. You know, all kinds of bad things can happen to you, but if you've got like a stoic, like equanimous, accepting sort of attitude, then you're not going to freak out and melt down and start blaming somebody else. And the left just doesn't get that at all. You know, the whole idea that if two people are having a conversation, both of them have ethical duties. You know, the person who's speaking has the ethical duty not to deliberately offend somebody. But even if he fails and does offend them, the person who's listening has the ethical duty to forgive him, you know, and not to freak out and melt down over it. And the left have one side of that, at least with regard to not offending leftists, but the other side of forgiving, like someone who speaks offensively, they just have tossed that completely out the window.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's totally insane. But they're the popular cult, and they're, I guess, I don't know if they're growing. I guess they are growing, but they have a certain strength in their insanity. Their mass insanity, and it is destructive, but it is the popular cult of our day.
It reminds me a lot of like early Christianity in the late Roman Empire, where there were a lot of similarities, just like the hysterical intolerance of anyone disagreeing with them, and the emphasis on compassion and love, but only for their own side. But at least the early Christians really did have a moral high ground, which I think is lacking in the new cult.
That's true, but it is similar in some ways. It's in that way, it's very kind of Christianity in some ways was kind of effeminate in that way. And
seems to me as well, sorry to interject, but I would just say that the Christians were probably prolific breeders. So there was probably an evolutionary reason why they were successful. I would say that the modern left are definitely not. A lot of them don't have that many kids. It's not particularly Darwinistic as a belief. So I can't see it lasting for a long time. It's just my view. But it'll just petter out. Just for being dysgenic. I'm not sure what you think about that, but
it makes sense.
It could be, but it's very strong at the moment, and still, you know, the strength of it is astounding, because they're so devoted to it. You know, and a devotee to this cult, you know, you can't miss them, and they're not afraid to put it in your face anytime they want. You know, so at the moment it's very strong, but that's true as well. So like that, but that's very long term. That's waiting for people to die in 50 years. You know.
I have a sinking feeling that's what we're going to be doing. to be honest, I can't see this resolving soon. But
we'll meditate, maybe. You know, we'll have our Stoic Buddhism, our Marcus Aurelius and Buddha combined. It will be our, and Baron von Ungern, Sternberg, whatever his name was.
Yeah, I just agree with Pannobhasa as well. I think that the problem for people in the West is the material condition is so excellent that there's really no need to treat yourself harshly. I think it's why would you bother? So I think necessity is really going to be something that is needing to it's gonna have to happen for things to change, and I think that'll be linked to material conditions myself. But
they have no self-discipline, and they don't feel they don't undergo those trials of say torturing yourself like the Buddha did. There's nothing like that they even approach. They don't have that feeling or understanding of that kind of discipline.
I think part of it is just the wisdom of I mean, you get everything, you know, like the Buddha himself, according to the legend, he was living in palaces with only beautiful young women in his staff and that sort of thing. And a lot of people, they just get everything they want, and then they're still not satisfied. So, I mean, there's some of that also. If you have enough introspection and enough wisdom to realize that even if you got every hedonistic pleasure you were yearning for, you still wouldn't be happy, then there's that too. Although I doubt that most people have enough wisdom for that. So I think we're going to have to go with SOF casts, and things are going to have to get a lot worse before people are really inspired to turn inwards and maybe look to something other than technology for their inner peace.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Does Buddhism is there a Buddhist approach to the idea that technology itself is causing at least part of this?
Well, Orthodox Theravada doesn't say anything about it because they really didn't have technology when the texts were written more than 2,000 years ago.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's basically the Four Noble Truths. The second noble truth is all suffering comes from craving or desire. So yeah, it's like if you had wisdom, then you'd like be reducing your desires, instead, or and technology really doesn't have much to do about it. It's sometimes technology just increases desires. It's like you have to have all the top of the line new stuff that they're dishing out. It's like you got to have the new cell phone, even though people lived without cell phones for who knows how long, and they got along fine. And I really doubt that people are any happier now with all the technology than they were in the Stone Age.
Yeah. That's the discipline in Buddhism of like just learning to do nothing. And is it's something very alien to them and to the modern world, but that would be good to that would be the secret.
Yeah, or even if you do something, I mean, you just do it without greed, hate, or aversion, or greed, hate, or delusion. You just have like the Stoic philosophical attitude and do what has to be done.
Yeah, but just not being afraid of doing nothing for a while, kind of thing.
Yeah.
That scares a lot of people nowadays, I think. And like the system itself, you might say is a kind of this techno edifice. It runs on its own. In a way, it's its own like evil god. That's why I think of it. Like honestly, it has its own desires and it controls people. As Ted Kaczynski would say, it is kind of running the show, even though it's like a headless machine where it's undefined. It's a system that self-perpetuates and defends itself. This is a whole other thing. I shouldn't be talking about this. Sorry. And I'm not sure how it relates to Buddhism, but that's like part of it's not just individuals and the woke people. They're all just part of the system so if there's like I think any discipline in Buddhism or anything else, if they have an answer or a way to look at that or address it and think of it and include it in there. I mean, you guys might break off and start your own faction of Buddhism, like
yeah, maybe we already
address
did.
modern issues with a Buddhist take. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe that's what you're doing.
Yeah, that's the direction I'm going anyway. Can't really speak
good.
for SOF cast, but
Yeah,
I'm certainly not going along with the rainbow flags and mindfulness of white privilege and that sort of thing.
Yeah, no, neither. You could probably call it Buddhism with Kaczynskiite features for me personally.
Nice,
yeah. Bronze Age pervert Buddhism.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think we did a good job. And that's it. What do you think?
It's been good.
Do you have anything? Do you have a website or a book or anything you want to?
Yeah, I got both. Got a blog called The Outsider and sort of a primordial website that I haven't done much with, which is nipapancha.org, NIPPAPANCA, and recently put 3 books up on Amazon. So I've got 3 books for sale too, which are actually like philosophical essays, like compilations of philosophical essays that I've written.
You finished 3 books at the same time?
In rapid succession. I had already written a bunch of stuff, so I just edited them and compiled them and got them in order.
Were you writing these in the cave, or is this all since you came back?
I started writing back around 2000. Well, actually, I started writing back in the 2000s. First thing I wrote was back in the 1990s, but
all right.
Most of what I've been writing has been over the past several years.
Okay. Very good. Very good. Yeah. So check those out. And SOF, you got your, what have you got?
Just a podcast, mate. New episode most weeks. This week I had Stephanie Seneff, who's a PhD from MIT, on to talk about the vaccine and some of the potential problems we could experience as a species as a result of taking that, which is pretty interesting. But yeah, as I said, I've got Christopher Beckwith coming up to talk about the Buddha, the historical Buddha, and some of the new theories he has surrounding a whole bunch of things on that topic. So yeah, that's about it from me.
All right, sounds good. And yeah, that was good. Very enlightening. I think I've learned at least something about all this. I've always wanted to know a bit more, so that's great. And I'm sure if anybody watches this, they will also learn a bit more about it. It's very complex, and there's lots of facets. So I probably should read some of Panyo's books, I guess, maybe learn really the ins and outs. And if I had time for reading, I would. And I'm sure I will one day. Not at the moment, but I will.
Yeah.
I'll reach for your books for many others, because I know you've got the historic insight, and you're not really messing around, and awareness of the modern world and so forth. So
yeah, just look up Essays in Theravada Buddhism by John David Reynolds on Amazon. Okay. You'll find it. Okay.
And as a fellow Pacific Northwesterner of the old days, and we know how it
yeah,
the nostalgia, and you can tell.
I used to party in Vancouver a lot back when the drinking age in Canada was 19.
Right. Yeah. I remember that. Yeah. Although I actually grew up east of Vancouver in a small town in the boonies, in the bush. So it was really like everybody there was like either a harsh redneck or a harsh hippie, like really extremes of both. So that's really what I am, probably, I guess. But yeah, it was amazing. Amazing time and place. It's all gone now, of course, but there was a specific culture back then in those places. It was all like partying in the woods, heavy metal, this is how it was. But yeah, so that was good. Thanks, guys. That was very informative, and I guess that's it.
So, yeah, it's been good.
Yeah,
pleasure.
Really good. Yeah, talk to you later. Okay, goodbye.